Alright, let's have a vote. I couldn't tell. KFC first. Raise our hands. Okay. Okay. Club sandwiches? Alright. Still can't tell. Anyways, if you guys don't know me, my name's Yash, and I'll be talking about crypto exchanges. First, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I started trading stocks on paper when I was about 9 years old. Did won a bunch of prize money and started trading real stocks when I was 13, and also became a developer around the same time after years of console hacking and just playing around with the cybersecurity exploits. I worked at Stanford as doing iOS and web, eventually got into blockchain dev, and at the same time I started trading crypto because I had mined crypto originally in 2011 on my gaming PC, and I sold it a little bit too soon, and I got FOMO, so I decided I'm going to start trading it. So I did that for a while, started applying quantitative methods to trade, and it was pretty fun, but after a while I decided I want to be a developer again. I got involved with blockchain dev again. I built a lending platform on Ethereum, and now I'm working on exchange for crypto derivatives. So before I talk about that, let's get started with the history of crypto exchanges because it's a long presentation. All right, let's begin. So in the beginning, before Bitcoin, before Hashcash, we had a different kind of digital currency. It wasn't decentralized or backed by this mathematical notion of trust. It was simply e-gold. So e-gold, as you might be able to guess, is backed by grams of gold in a vault somewhere. It's completely centralized, and nobody really knows which transactions are occurring besides the operators of e-gold. So originally, the creators of e-gold ran the exchange themselves up until 2000. In 2000, they decided that the risk of being the central counterparty is too great, and they separated themselves from the exchange side of things and started focusing only on settlement. So this opened the door for third-party exchanges to come in and start dealing with e-gold. And e-gold was really popular for tax dodgers, for money launderers, for people who want to send money across borders without dealing with Western Union and whatnot. And it was great. A bunch of these exchanges popped up, and regulators started getting annoyed, especially in the United States, because now you have this way to send money to people that the government can't really look into. So, somewhat unsurprisingly, in 2006, the New York authorities, they arrested the proprietors of Gold Age, and they charged them for violation of Article 13B of New York State banking law, which says that you cannot operate a money transmitting business without the proper license. Now, of course, they pleaded innocence, but nonetheless, they were charged with 5 years imprisonment, which later got reduced to 5 years parole. And that was pretty much it, except one of the owners, his name was Widowski. He ran away to Costa Rica. In 2006, he started the Liberty Reserve, and we will get back to that later. Another thing that was going on in 2006 was something called Magic the Gathering Online, a very popular game. There's this programmer by the name of Jed McCaleb, some of you may recognize that name. He decided that he wants to create a website for people to trade these trading cards. Right? And so he buys nonbox.com, and he sets up an exchange for these cards. And he runs it for about 3 months before he decides that this is really boring. I don't blame him. So these are two Magic the Gathering online cards. This one is called Daring Thief, and this one is called Grave Exchange. Just 2 random cards. So now Bitcoin pops up in 2009 on the heels of the 2008 financial crisis, and it quickly attracts a following in 2 communities. community of PC gamers and cybersecurity enthusiasts. For PC gamers, Bitcoin was cool because it's digital money and their PCs were very good at making lots of it very fast. And for cybersecurity professionals, it was interesting because the way most of security works is you use these functions called hashes. Some of you are you guys familiar with hashes? Yeah, so hash is basically, it's a common way of storing passwords, because if you take the hash of something, it's very hard to go back to the password. You can take a password, you can convert it to the hash, but you can't break the hash and try to see what the password is until Bitcoin happened. So the way proof of work works for Bitcoin is basically you have to use a lot of computational power to guess or brute force hashes. So for the first time ever, there was this threat of a distributed computing network that could, break into people's passwords and break this encryption. And you guys know the rest. So Jed Mikhailo, he decides that he wants to take Bitcoin and make an exchange for it, which had never been done before. And as being the cheap guy that he is, he uses the same domain name. He's actually a billionaire now. You can look him up. He creates the first Bitcoin exchange, and later on he went on to found Ripple and Stellar, which he's a CTO of now, just a fun fact. So he sets up this exchange, but he's not very experienced, and he makes some rookie mistakes. As you can see on the Bitcoin forums, he asks a couple of beginner questions, and a couple minutes later, the website is live. And he makes a big blunder from a security perspective, which is that he's transmitting the login credentials across the network as plain text, which also probably means that he's storing credentials on his website as plain text. Now, this is completely untenable from a security perspective, and this is the first of many mistakes that he made. He gets called out after he puts his exchange up on this mistake. And so, yeah, this is what Mt. Gox looked like originally. Very basic, but the founder actually had somewhat of a long-term vision for his project. As you can see, he talks about offering margin trading and options, and he even had dark pools. So forward-thinking, but the technology just wasn't there at the time. So this happens. Mt. Gox loses lots of money. The proceedings began, and to this day, the process of making these victims whole is still going on. So, does anybody recognize this quote? Or who used this quote? Warren Buffett, exactly. What was he using it for? Or this
Derivatives.
Derivatives, yeah. So Warren Buffett described derivatives as financial weapons of mass destruction. And so, why I bring this up is because what Mt. Gox taught us is that Bitcoin held on exchanges is actually a form of derivative, right? It is, it's not this kind of derivative, it's an agreement. It's an agreement between two people that derives value from some underlying asset. So in this case, you have a contract with the exchange that says the exchange will give you some amount of Bitcoin proportional to how many contracts you own, which is fine if the exchange can honor that promise. But as we've seen, sometimes it's not possible. So now you are exposed to this counterparty risk. Around that time, there is the first Bitcoin margin trading exchange, which was set up by a 17-year-old in Singapore named Zhou Tong. And so Bitcoinica, it offered 5 times leverage, whether you long and short Bitcoin, and it looks something like this. It looked exactly like this. So Bitcoinica was, the way it operated, it was kind of like a bucket shop, which we'll talk more about later, where they didn't actually store their Bitcoins on the exchange, right? They were smart. They decided that in order to be more secure, they were going to store their Bitcoins on Mt. Gox. Right? So they would allow people to long and short Bitcoin, and then they would run an algorithm that would trade on Mt. Gox to basically cover the user's position, which was great while it worked until it didn't. So Bitcoinica got hacked, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And somebody on the forums actually warned this guy, Joe Tong, that you need to do a better job of securing this. But either he didn't listen to him or he just couldn't figure it out. So Bitcoinica got hacked. The first time they lost tens of thousands of Bitcoins, and they said, okay, it's fine, we'll cover it with our reserves. So they did that, but after that, Joe Tong sells his website to a group of investors who hire 3 developers to manage the website. And now Bitcoinica gets hacked again. And now they lose a similar amount of Bitcoin, and they shut down their exchange and they start a claims process. And they would have been able to make their customers whole, but then one of the developers, he gets a bright idea. And he decides that, in the spirit of open source, he's going to open source all of the code for Bitcoinica. And unfortunately, in the source code was the username and password for the Mt. Gox account. So in July, some hacker realizes this, and he takes all of their money, which is about, at the time it was around 400,000 US. So they're done. They have no chance of paying anybody back. And Roger Ver was actually trying to buy Bitcoinica at the same time and had a lot of money there himself. But, he kind of gave up at that point. As you can see, these headlines, not good. So Joe Tong was viewed by a lot of people as a scammer and a dishonest guy, but interestingly enough, Vitalik Buterin, of all people, he painted a different picture of him. He was a writer for Bitcoin magazine at the time, and he described him as a visionary, someone ahead of his time, almost like himself and like Satoshi. Interesting. Around the same time as Bitcoinica, there was another exchange that was launched by the name of ICBIT. Now, ICBIT was not really popular because Bitcoinica stole the spotlight for a long time. But while Bitcoinica was kind of the belle of the ball, so to speak, ICBIT kept working on the platform. They kept upgrading the platform, and they started adding new features and also new features, the first features. And then around July of 2012, they became very popular. They touted the first exchange to have high-speed order matching and a NoSQL database, which is, for that time, it was considered quite good. And in addition, they implemented a non-custodial model. So I guess they did learn something from the hacks. And what this non-custodial model involves, basically, they are not going to be the central counterparty to the trades. The trades would be settled between the 2 transacting parties, and they didn't assume any liability. So for them, it was a good way to absolve themselves of the risk. They were very hands-off to that end. They had no restrictions. They had no KYC requirements at all, because they just said, we're not a place for money laundering, so we're not going to enforce anti-money laundering compliance. So with ICBIT, these were the first futures looked like. They had a futures contract on the price of Bitcoin against the US dollar, or the opposite. They had a price feature on the mining difficulty, and this futures contract, which you can still trade today, of Litecoin against the price of Bitcoin. So ICBIT kind of died a slow death because of their non-custodial model. They didn't have a lot of liquidity, and they were bought out by another company and turned into orderbook.net, which ran until 2016 with very thin order books. And then the CFTC served them with a notice, a cease and desist notice. and afterwards, I guess, the website's down, it kind of went away. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Liberty Reserve. Liberty Reserve finally gets busted after a multi-year sting operation that involved 17 countries. And it turned out to be one of the largest money laundering operations in the history of the United States. They laundered tens of millions of dollars at a time. And it turns out that the eGold was actually a very important off-ramp for crypto in the early days. Because if you wanted to sell a large amount of Bitcoin, you couldn't do it on an exchange because you would tear through the order book, you would affect the price. Dark pools weren't always very liquid. So what happened usually was you would purchase Liberty Reserve, or you would get a voucher from your exchange, or through a third party for another eGold exchange, such as RM exchange, and then you would do the eGold exchange, issue a wire to your bank account. This was kind of the de facto way of laundering crypto, especially for hackers. And so after this happens, a lot of the major bag holders of Bitcoin, they lose their ability to liquidate large amounts. And so for a while, they're kind of without a liquidity solution, for almost a year. But however, this does become good for Bitcoin overall, because now people can't use eGold. They know the days of eGold are over. So for the people who are trying to do their illicit activities, they just use Bitcoin. So the user base went up with Bitcoin, but they still need a new liquidity solution. So in 2014, this guy named Brock Pierce, he starts something called RealCoin. And RealCoin leverages something called the Mastercoin protocol, it was called at the time, to take a bunch of US dollars and digitize them and put them on the Bitcoin blockchain. Okay? And so his promise is never worry about Bitcoin volatility again. A couple months later, the CEO of the project rebrands it to what you know today as Tether. And that's all I'm going to say about Tether. So, a little bit about derivatives today. It's not so different. It's a little bit more wild, wild west. Before I talk about the derivatives, I want to explain what these new futures are, how they work. So, what Bitcoinica introduced and what a lot of the exchanges today, such as BitMEX and OKCoin, use, is something called non-linear inverse futures. So you're trading on the value of Bitcoin against the US dollar, but it's settled in Bitcoin. So in effect, this means that your payoff is non-linear, meaning if you are net long, you make some amount of money for a $100 move, upward move in the price. You don't make that same amount of money if it goes up another $100. You make an amount that's slightly less because it's proportional in effect to the percentage move in the price of Bitcoin, right? And so what this is you're basically long and shorting the US dollar denominated in Bitcoin. So this is fine for speculators, but we do still need linear futures, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. So perpetual swaps were introduced by BitMEX. This is kind of like your standard futures contract, but you don't take delivery of the underlying asset, and there is no settlement date. So in effect, this is just like trading an asset on the spot market, but you also get a lot of leverage. And in addition to leverage, you don't have a liquidity issue because you can create as many of these contracts as you want on the coin that has a finite supply. There can be 21 million Bitcoins, but there can be 21 billion perpetual swap contracts, right? You can have a ton of volume on an asset that has finite supply. So this was a pretty nice invention. So if you trade on BitMEX, perhaps you've received this email. What happens in these exchanges that don't implement margin calls is they automatically liquidate your positions when they reach a certain point. Let me back up and explain a little bit. So in a traditional brokerage, what would happen is if you're trading on leverage, and you're losing money, your broker will issue a margin call, right? They'll ask you to put down more collateral to cover the position that you have. But in these exchanges, there's no identity, right? Everybody's anonymous. So this concept of an anonymous person owing money to the exchange does not work very well. So in effect, what the exchange wants to do then is they want to manage their risk, and they want to basically liquidate you once your position, your loss reaches a certain threshold, right? So that you don't owe them money. So this is this happens quite a lot, actually. As you can see, there's this Twitter bot called BitMEXRect that describes, tells you every time somebody's gotten liquidated. And there has been a bit of a conspiracy regarding this, because every time a trader is liquidated, the exchange stands to make a lot of money, especially if it's a $1 million position like this. Exchanges also have lots of money, and they can manipulate the markets. They also know exactly what price your position is going to be liquidated at. So they have a very large incentive to move the market in a direction that causes your position to be liquidated. And so this is kind of one of the biggest dilemmas of these derivatives exchanges, because they kind of have a monopoly right now. If you go and you ask them to prove that they're not doing this, they don't care. Right? If you don't want to use their product, then don't use it. They own the market. So there are a couple of these exchanges, like this one. This one is a known bucket shop. It's called Whale Club. And what Whale Club actually does is they'll give you tons of margin to speculate on these pairs, but they don't actually trade them. So you can long Bitcoin with 10 times, 20 times, 50 times leverage, but they're not actually trading Bitcoin on your behalf. So they're just effectively a casino, and they will pay you whatever you get once your position is closed. However, what the case has been with Whale Club is that a lot of your trades are later invalidated, and some large positions, they get closed out because a large exchange like this, they have enough money to push the price in a direction that causes their traders to lose money, because again, there's no system of margin calls. So they can actually keep 100% of the money you put in. So this has been going on for a while, and in the United States, this had a very destructive effect on the markets in the early 1920s. So this was made completely illegal. But in an unregulated market, bucket shops continue to exist. So that's what happens. You use a bucket shop, you get liquidated by whales. So recently in crypto, this idea came up of decentralizing everything, and this is kind of passed on to exchanges. And so we have the paradigm of decentralized exchanges. And this is actually a very good thing, because a decentralized exchange doesn't have to deal with the risk of managing users' funds. And more importantly for users, they have actual ownership of their coins. You're owning the crypto, you're not owning the derivative, right? So it's good for them, and it also is somewhat more resistant to government intervention, because you can't really take down a smart contract as a government. If you're a 15-year-old hacker, maybe, but if you're a government, no, you can't. So decentralized exchanges kind of look like this, some of them. EtherDelta is a decentralized exchange that runs on Ethereum, obviously, and it's a smart contract. And the way it works is you store your funds in a smart contract, and if there's a distributed ledger on the smart contract that kind of holds everybody's money, you can withdraw whenever you want, and you can make trades whenever you want. However, as you can see by these candlesticks, it's not very liquid, because it's hard to use, and transaction speed is in seconds rather than milliseconds because of the Ethereum blockchain operating very slowly. It still is a step in the right direction. Some troubling things about EtherDelta is that, so everybody can see the source code. If you go on eXchan, it tells you which vulnerabilities exist currently for the smart contract. And making a smart contract secure is actually very difficult, but this is how much money is stored in one smart contract. This in cybersecurity is what's known as a honeypot. This is the same reason a lot of centralized exchanges have been hacked, is because all the money is stored in this one big pool. Very appealing to hackers. And so, two main reasons it's difficult to secure these decentralized exchanges that are built on Ethereum is that the programming language used to make these smart contracts is Turing complete. It's a programming language that basically, in layman's terms, you can implement any algorithm. This makes it very difficult for you to prove that it's free of bugs. And because of the nature of smart contracts, you can't fix a smart contract. If you're running a decentralized exchange, you need to fix your code, you need to publish it on the blockchain again, and you need to find some way to tell your entire user base to use this one, not that one, which is a logistics problem. As the developers themselves have said, don't really rely on Ethereum for something that's mission critical, something that deals with lots of money. As you can see in these headlines, if you add all this up, it's about $506 million in these headlines alone that have been lost due to bad smart contract practices. Now, the thing with smart contracts and decentralized applications is that the best practices are still emerging, and they're only going to emerge over time. So until then, the only way to learn how to do it right is to move fast and break things, which for a developer is fine, but for a financial institution, it's absolutely not fine. And so let's talk a little bit about what exchanges and what derivatives are going to look like in the future. So I think there are three main areas that me personally, as someone who's building exchange, I want to focus on. I think everyone else in the market should also focus on these things. The offering of derivatives, liquidity in the market, and the disintermediation of exchanges. So starting off with derivatives, I think we need to be considering metrics like volatility and sentiment when releasing these derivative contracts. You wouldn't create a derivative for a stable coin or something like Tether unless you're paranoid about Tether. But for something that's volatile, that's kind of where you need a hedging instrument. For something that has a lot of conflicting sentiment, that's also where hedging instruments are useful. Right now it seems like there is no rhyme or reason to why these contracts come out. On these exchanges, you usually see some new altcoin feature contract comes out, and then there's a contest to trade on it. But if people actually wanted that derivative, then I argue that you wouldn't necessarily need to have this kind of contest, and this money would be better spent on the R&D, securing your exchanges, and creating a sustainable solution for liquidity. Let's go over some use cases for derivatives. Like, let's say there's an ICO for Lambo Mooncoin. And Lambo Mooncoin, you want to invest in it because they have a great white paper. Their website is very pretty, and their CEOs come out and they just give them like very charismatic talk. And so you think maybe it's a great project, but it also just could be a complete scam. You don't know because there's all these articles and these Telegram groups tell you different things. And so how do you find out what overall market sentiment is? You create a futures contract for Lambo Mooncoin that settles maybe 6 months after the settlement or after the ICO. So basically, this market is created and it becomes liquid, and you have two possible scenarios. One is Contango, and the other one is known as backwardation. And in Contango, the futures contract is trading at a premium to the ICO price. And in the backwardation market, it's the opposite. It's trading at a discount. So if it's in Contango, then this is what market sentiment is, right? You're driving a Lambo on the moon. You made it, right? The market thinks that this coin is undervalued, and they're expecting its value to be greater than what it is now 6 months after the ICO. So if you are a person who likes to follow trends, then you would buy it. Otherwise, if it's in Contango, this is what market sentiment is like. So they think this coin is terrible. They think this project is a scam, and they're all shorting it as a result. So maybe if you like to trade on a contrarian philosophy, you would buy it, but that's on you. Let's talk about linear futures now. Just to refresh your memory, linear futures contract is basically if it's Bitcoin against the US dollar, $100, and I'm net long, then if it goes up $100, I make $100. If it goes up another $100, I make another $100. Payoff is linear. It's a straight line. So let's say I'm a merchant and I want to accept payment in all these different cryptocurrencies. Okay, right? Dogecoin, for example. Like, let's say that I paid for the KFC in Dogecoin, and let's say I paid for a lot of KFC. So it's such a large amount of KFC that the amount of Dogecoin is so big they can't sell it all at once because the liquidity isn't there. If they sold it, they would lose 10% on the spot. And it's so volatile, and they want to take my money, right? Because I'm a Dogecoin millionaire, but they have no way to hedge against the volatility. But let's say there's a linear futures contract for Dogecoin. Now what can I do if I'm KFC? I can accept payment from this Dogecoin millionaire, and I can immediately short the same amount of Dogecoin. Now this way, if the price of Dogecoin goes down, then I'm hedged and I don't lose any money. So this can be done for like any cryptocurrencies, and this will enable institutions and merchants to accept these smaller, more volatile coins as a means of payment without needing to worry about the volatility. There's another use case for price discovery. So a lot of these coins, they have their ICO, and then nothing happens for 6 months, and then suddenly they get listed on exchange, and then you see this fat red candle like this. It just gets dumped. But if you have a futures market for this coin before it gets listed on the exchange, then you can enable price discovery to occur before these listings happen. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to dump, but there will still, market sentiment will be more public, and there will be less surprises in most cases. A counterexample of this, however, is when the futures for the 2x fork for Bitcoin were trading at about $2,000 before it was announced that the fork wasn't happening, and it went to $200. But the point is, you'll have a better picture of the market, before real liquidity occurs. And liquidity is still a very big issue for exchanges today, and one of the reasons for that is technical. Some of these exchanges, they're hosted on AWS, which makes it very hard to trade at low latencies and do high frequency trading on them. And it also becomes very risky if you can't communicate with an exchange at a certain guaranteed latency. You'll start to have orders that won't get filled due to lack of low latency, and it's risky to trade at high frequencies. People just kind of stay away, especially market makers, because market making is a very high speed activity. 98% of these orders are canceled. If they can't be canceled in time, it's a problem. None of these exchanges today, for example, implement compliance with the fixed protocol, which is used in the US for a lot of the major stock exchanges to allow orders to be filled in less than 1 millisecond. Like if crypto had that, it would be very, very good for liquidity.
Which protocol is it?
Fix.
FIX?
FIX. Yeah. So this is what slippage looks like on major exchanges. There was a study done where they tried to sell $50,000 worth of assets and basically measure the change between the price they want to sell it at and the price they actually sell it at. That's called slippage. And as you can see, it's quite high. And if it's, if this is how much money you lose on a $50,000 trade, then, imagine how much an institution would lose. So this is already very difficult for retail investors to get into, and it's not going to be appealing for institutions until this problem is fixed.
Is this for Bitcoin?
No, these are for some smaller cap coins, but still, still have a decent market cap or 24-hour volume, as you can see. So the 24-hour volume is measured. It is if you have like $100 million in 24-hour volume, then selling $50,000 worth of something for about 8 weeks until the guy gets his Lamborghini, and after that volume kind of drops off. But additionally, when you have somebody who's only making your markets for 8 weeks, then they don't really have an incentive to play nice. They also tend to manipulate the markets during this time. So if you look at the charts for these altcoins, when these trading contests occur, you can actually see that there's more volatility, and it's not just any kind of volatility. The volatility is specifically where there's a pump, and then it just kind of consolidates for a while, and there's a breakout, and then a dump. The reason this is done is because there are a lot of traders who buy off of breakouts, and once you pump the price up, you give them a directional signal to buy into the coin, and afterwards, once the price has gone up significantly, you dump it so that they get stopped out of their positions, and this is called stop loss hunting. So
Stop loss what?
stop loss hunting or stomping
Yeah,
stops,
yeah.
right? This is how they make money. So yeah, there can be a better way to incentivize your market makers, a way to provide consistent rewards for them, to be good actors in the long term, and not just 8 weeks. I think that would be a step towards creating healthy, sustainable liquidity. And also, we need to work towards disintermediation in order to prevent conflicts of interest with crypto exchanges. Like one of the examples was with bucket exchanges and derivatives exchanges. If you are the one lending money to traders, then you have a lot of incentive to trade against them, to move the market in order to liquidate them and make a lot of money at their expense. This is just a fundamental opposition of interests. And I think the only way to solve that is to take out the exchange as the intermediary in that aspect, and maybe do something similar to what Bitcoinica did, and make it non-custodial and have lending occur on a peer-to-peer basis, but also have some ways to make sure that it's liquid, within that environment. So yeah, disintermediation is actually it's referred to about 44 times in the Bitcoin white paper. And I think it's really important for creating a system that is trustless, because the more trustlessness there is, the less room for corruption there is, or at least there's less need for a reliance on the exchange's good faith. So a non-custodial model fixes this, but you still have to rely on the exchange for the order book, because having a central order book right now is very essential to creating liquidity, because if you have a decentralized exchange, then if you have a message, it needs to go not to one place like it does here. It needs to go to basically every node, because you don't know, if you're a maker, if you're putting an order on the order book, then you have to send it to everybody, and then somebody's going to take it off, and then everybody needs to know what's going on too. So you have a lot more messages sent in this scenario, and they're sent across a network that is not as high speed because this is going to be an exchange that's got like fiber optic cabling and whatnot. So this is many times faster than this, which is why market makers and high frequency traders prefer this as opposed to this. And this is why these decentralized exchanges still remain liquid. So for the foreseeable future, I think centralized order books are going to remain the de facto standard. But in the future, once we can figure out a way to decentralize the order book, then we have further reduced our reliance on the exchange and created a system that's even more sustainable, because if your exchange can't mess with your order book, it can't mess with your money, then it's going to be around for a lot longer time, and it's also going to be a lot harder to hack. And that's pretty much it. That's what, So last thing is that we need to focus on security, whether it's centralized or decentralized. As you can see in this example, people find exploits in exchanges all the time, and they sell them. There's a lot of money in centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges, and the approach to securing them has always been it's been reactive, not proactive. People don't start thinking about security until their exchange has been hacked very badly. So the whole space would benefit from having a better system of testnet exchange combined with the security bounty system. And because there really is no excuse, they have enough money to give away their means, then I think it definitely could be used to secure their infrastructure. And that's kind of what I've been working on with my exchange. I just published a one-pager today, so you guys can check it out. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for. Don't be shy. Questions?
So is your exchange decentralized or?
No, at the time being, it's not decentralized. It's partially distributed, built on the Hyperledger Fabric backend, but using a central order book. And the reason it's not fully decentralized is because I don't believe you can fully decentralize an exchange and have liquidity and security yet. It's part of a long-term vision for sure, but it's important to start with something that works today in order if you want to have any shot at making something that will work tomorrow.
So you said Ethereum is too slow for decentralization for exchanges. Is there anything out there now that could potentially lead these DAO exchanges or DAO entities, decentralized exchanges, to be run in the next few months, or?
Anything that will allow them to operate at high speeds?
Yeah.
I think not in the next few months, because it's a physics problem, really. You're sending one message. Basically, the problem is how can you allow multiple messages to be sent multiple places in a network at the same speed that it takes to send one message to one place in a best case scenario, right? It's like like running from here to there versus trying to touch every single chair in the room and then coming back and doing that at the same time it takes me to do this. So
is there any solutions that are like hybrid, like part centralized and like it makes it centralized first, and then within like minutes or something it makes it more decentralized so it can't be penetrated by hackers, for instance?
Hybrid solutions mostly are, so there's kind of two hybrid solutions. One is you have a central order book and you do your order matching in a centralized fashion, and then you propagate everything to the across the distributed network and update the ledger in that way. The problem here is that your ledger is updated slower than your order book is updated. The other way is if your blockchain is partially decentralized, like EOS, where you have where you basically reduce the number of nodes needed to achieve consensus. Like you have 21 block producers versus thousands of miners on another blockchain. That's one way of doing it, but in both scenarios, you are making it less trustless, and you're relying more on your block producers or the people who run order book. So is it possible? Yes. Do you have to make compromises? Definitely.
I'm just thinking more in terms of security for hackers getting in there and modifying certain transactions, and when people come to withdraw, then that's just an added extra layer of security.
Yeah, I think if you want an extra layer of security, definitely don't put it on a public blockchain, because if it's on a public blockchain, everybody can see, who has what, and then people become targets. If someone's on Ethereum, you can actually see, whose money is going where, and that's how the FBI identified the owner of Silver Road. So it's very, very possible that if there's a really rich guy in a decentralized exchange, you can figure out who he is, with some forensic know-how. So that scares a lot of people. So there's a lot of privacy you give up being on a completely public blockchain, and that's a concession a lot of big parties aren't willing to make. And institutions also don't want you to know, how much they're trading, how much exposure they have to this and that. And there's a need for privacy. Yep.
Will you be first question? Who's your competitor? What are you improving upon? What do you compare yourself to that you are doing better than something that exists already?
We're comparing ourselves to derivatives exchanges, centralized and decentralized. So we're trying to create a better paradigm for how we should secure our exchanges, the kinds of derivatives we should be offering, and also how we go about creating liquidity. So it's not, we're not specifically competing against centralized or decentralized, we're competing against derivatives exchanges, period. Because there are issues kind of on both sides, and the way to solve them is kind of it's a hybrid approach.
Will you also be listing? Will you also be accepting Binance and these others? Will you be listing new tokens yourself, or are you just dealing with the existing?
We won't be dealing with tokens, just derivatives.
What about your exchange?
Yeah, it's very early stage, so I'm not going to talk much about it on the record, but it's on the one pager's on there. That's
Why did you choose to run on Hyperledger?
Because it is still a distributed ledger, and later on when you migrate to another system, it will be easier, and it allows you to have this non-custodial escrow model in place on a blockchain without having the same downfalls as Ethereum does. Yep.
What's the economics on?
What?
What's the economics?
Like token economics? Token economics, you can ask me about that later, after this. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, you talk about security if your exchange is only dealing with futures, no actual coins, there's really not much of security risk, right?
Well, there is.
Being hacked,
Money is still changing hands. So to that end, there is a risk, because one trader is transacting with another trader. You can still try to intercept that, those funds. And I would say that derivatives exchanges are actually some of the biggest targets, because the derivatives market is way bigger than the underlying because of the amount of leverage that's available. On BitMEX, for example, you get 100 times the leverage. So the BitMEX derivatives market is 100 times the size of the Bitcoin market, effectively. So because money is changing hands, then you're always a target. Even if you don't store the funds, you have valuable information. Right? You can trigger, you can send money to somebody else's wallet. Right? You can mess with the smart contracts, or chain code as it's referred to in Fabric.
I might be asking a really stupid question, but why don't cryptocurrencies just list on a? So there's two dilemmas I see, right? Which are and then versus the integrity, or how do we know you're not screwing us, or controlling us? Why doesn't crypto or cryptocurrencies just list on a normal exchange? Ones that are regulated and fast.
So the most liquid exchanges are very expensive to list on. If you want to be listed on Binance, for example, it will cost you 10 times what it costs to be listed on NASDAQ. It will cost you $2 million after you go through a rigorous approval process. And they will want some of your tokens in return for listing you, and then
But that's paying for the service, right?
yeah, but what's going to happen to your token after you get listed? What do you think they're going to do with it? Right? They're going to dump it.
Do you think it is solvable?
Yeah.
Like this trade-off between liquidity and
It's definitely solvable. It's just right now there's a lot of power in the hands of the exchanges, but there are solutions for your token to become liquid without having to go through these exchanges. Like if you want to be traded on EtherDelta, anybody can have an ERC token traded on EtherDelta, because for EtherDelta, all you need is the address of the token, and you can trade it. Of course, you won't have as much liquidity because it's a decentralized exchange, but there is ways for your token to be somewhat liquid without having to suck it up to these exchanges.
So earlier you were talking about the exchanges being incentivized to trade against the natural users because of cases like warning off. So how is that being handled now?
It's not. Yeah, just to clarify, the reason they would trade against users is, let's say, I am a margin trading exchange, and I've lent money to these traders to make bets. They're betting against me, right? It's like a casino. You're betting against the house on a lot of borrowed money, and that's the house's borrowed money. So if you win, the house loses, and the house can control, this outcome that you're betting on to some degree, and they have a large financial incentive to do so. So, why wouldn't they? And right now, there's no real way to tackle this problem, because why would centralized exchanges want to self-regulate? Right? It's the same reason Facebook doesn't want to be transparent. Right? If you have a monopoly, then the best way to keep it is Yep.
Where are you guys based?
Our team is distributed. I have some developers in New York, some developers in Toronto, and I'm between Hong Kong and Toronto.
You didn't get acquired by BankQ, did you?
No.
I mean, that was quick, yeah.
No. Not yet.
Not yet.
I think if you hit space.
Are you from Toronto?
No, I'm from Silicon Valley. Yeah.
Why Toronto? What's the team in Toronto?
So Toronto, you can find a lot of good blockchain developers because Vitalik went to University of Waterloo, and as a result, Waterloo has a lot of good blockchain community. In Toronto as well, it's a very technical community. It's kind of in contrast to in Hong Kong and Singapore, it's more more on the financial side. So, yeah.
When are you launching?
We are launching second quarter of next year. We're gonna have a public beta up before that, but we want to spend a lot of time securing the platform before we start taking people's money to trade on the platform, because you only get one shot at getting it right.
Are you self-funding, or have you already got some seed investment?
Yeah, we have some investment right now. So.
How do you deal with security? As in, before your launch, do you do a bounty for people's account, or what do you do?
So, yeah, bounty is one way to go about it. You should also have testnet exchange. and incentivize people to regularly just come in and break it. I think if you have the funds for it, you can have host hackathons, like actual are you familiar with Contango or any of these security hackathons?
No, but I just heard about the EOS one, right?
Yeah. So you can have these kind of events with big sponsors and lots of money, and you can hire a security team this way, and you can just with security, it's you have to actively try to break your system and put a lot of resources into breaking it, because retroactive solutions are not good. You know, patching hacks that have already happened is not going to grant you that much security. It's like a hands-on exercise.
So this might be like too big a question, but what are the kind of security flaws that we see when we see like 30 million USD going missing? Like, what causes this kind of problems?
So a lot of these flaws basically originate with the way the Ethereum client is written, and these smart contracts, they're code that is publicly available to anybody, and what goes wrong a lot of times is the permissioning of these smart contracts. And when the permissioning goes wrong, somebody who isn't authorized can do things that they shouldn't do with these programs. And these programs have large amounts of money stored within them, so they can transfer this amount of money, or they can accidentally delete $300 million because they called a function they weren't allowed to. So that's I think one of the biggest sources of issues. And there's some traditional types of hacks that happen with like My Ether wallet, where they just redirected users to another website. So there's layers of different vulnerabilities, from vulnerabilities in blockchain to social engineering issues that still are around and cause people to lose information.
Where are you going to be launching your exchange from?
You can ask me about that later. It's something that's in progress. We don't want to announce anything before.
Just curious, you mentioned that you are basically making this product in Toronto, and I suppose you're targeting various financial centers globally. How's the rollout in the US about the city itself?
Can you give him a mic?
I was just wondering how the whole blockchain community is going to impact itself. You hear a lot about blockchain in Asia, in places of Europe, and Toronto, but it doesn't sound like it's as active in the rest of the US. I just want to experience.
I think this blockchain community, I would say I've noticed two major hubs in North America, rather three. There's Toronto, there's New York, and San Francisco. And most of the technical talent seems to be concentrated in San Francisco for obvious reasons. And Toronto, basically attribute that to Waterloo's academic rigor and Vitalik's influence. And then New York, because of the financial sector, there's a lot of interest, but I think somewhat of a scarcity of technical talent. The consensus is based there, so you see a lot of talent that's slowly relocating to that area. Other than that, I think the majority of the US is not informed with blockchain yet. It's just regulators and hardcore techies who are thinking about it right now.
And outside of the Americans, where do you see? What cities do you see more like blockchain hubs?
What cities? Where?
Yeah. So the question was about what cities in the United States, and you mentioned San Francisco, New York, and Toronto. Outside the United States and Canada.
Outside the United States, okay, it's a tough one. Paris has they're getting better, I think, for tech, because of their president is very forward thinking on AI, and I've seen the blockchain community in Paris is kind of is growing slowly. They have a lot of technical schools there, like ICO Futures. They're trying to push awareness on that. So I think in the future it could be a good place. Switzerland, I haven't been to Switzerland, I don't know. But there's a lot of technical talent in Russia as well. However, I can't speak for quality of it myself. I don't know.
And not Hong Kong?
Yeah, Hong Kong, I have not. I haven't found any developers here. Unsurprisingly, I think it's mostly finance heavy sector, and I think a lot of blockchain companies they set up here and they start looking for technical talent, which is one way to do things. But I like to start with a technical team instead.
Why do you think that Binance grew so quickly and so big? And is there anything you can replicate or learn from?
Binance grew big. I think not just because of the CEO Caesar's efforts, but also because he was at the right time at the right place. This was kind of the peak of the crypto bubble, and he was also able to get a sizable investment from some large venture capital firms, and that kind of allowed him to reach his escape velocity very quickly. And at the time they came out, their main competitor, Matrix, they were kind of lagging behind as far as their support, and their tech was not great. They had some downtime sometimes, and I think they were able to come in at a very good time, where their competitor was kind of flailing, and when hype was at an all-time high, and just kind of capture the market, and then they kept putting out new coins that were in demand, and they stayed on top of their communication with the user base. Every time Binance went down for maintenance, the guy on Twitter, he just told people that it's for this reason, it's going to be up at this time. So people, I would say they had a little bit more confidence that their funds weren't stolen, and I think that was a very good move on their part to keep a good line of communication with their customer base.
Just very happy to hear that you have an operation in Toronto. This weekend is Canada Day, Sunday, and I would like to offer your team in Toronto the cool.ca token, which we're issuing this. It's just a free token. It's just cool to be Canadian. And if there are any Canadians in there, you're welcome to. Thank you very much. So we want those blockchain developers in Toronto to feel good. Feel cool. Cool.ca.
Like you mentioned, there's an element for like you mentioned, there's an element for interest when you're entering into a derivative contract against the exchange. So how do you intend to overcome that information asymmetry? If there is a significant position that can benefit the exchange if it is good. So how do you overcome the problems that it faces?
So you eliminate the exchange as the central counterparty and the lender. If the exchange isn't the one lending you the money, if it's completely peer-to-peer, then the trader on the other side, they first of all don't know what your liquidation price is, and if your derivatives exchange handles settlement intelligently, then they won't be able to manipulate the price in order to liquidate you, no matter how much money they have, because the way settlement indexes work, they use a time-weighted average of a bunch of different exchanges with the prices on those exchanges, and you can put in a couple of checks and balances to detect manipulation on one exchange, and not count the price on that. This way, you make a system that's more reliable, more trustworthy, and more trustless.
You were saying earlier that there's a lot of money to be made with exchanges. So that's why we see all these exchanges, new exchanges popping up all the time. So don't you think that in years time the competitive landscape will totally change for you?
Definitely, but with exchanges, what's interesting is that
What was the question? Can you repeat the question on the mic?
yes, the question was.
Well, the question was that exchanges at the moment are in a very strong position, so they earn a lot of money, which of course attracts new entrants into the market. So I was asking, when he launches in 2019, the situation will not completely change. So what's your view on that?
Thank you. So, in this space, first-to-market advantage is quite overrated, honestly, because when these exchanges first launch, and they have this energy business model, it's quite easy to become big and wealthy, and as a result, complacent. The changes that we are proposing require complete restructuring. So if another exchange, let's say, try to do the same thing, it would be too much cost for too little payoff. It would be it's very hard for a traditional centralized exchange to drop what they're doing and completely rebuild to meet a new paradigm. And the cost of being offline for that long is it's prohibitive. For an exchange that does so much volume that they make more money than Deutsche Bank per quarter, it would be it's very hard. So what you see in this industry and a lot of other industries is that these people who are first to market become very large. They are usually the first ones to become complacent and are easily displaced. Like what happened with Bitrise. That's why a lot of these exchanges that were there when crypto first became popular are no longer around. Because crypto is all about innovation at breakneck pace, and the market is still very immature. And I think until we have fully developed and become a mature market, then these industry leaders will continue to rise and fall over the next couple of years. The incumbents are not even close to being established.
Is your exchange position for retail or institutional?
Both.
But they're quite different.
You start with one and you just evolve towards the other. But I think if you focus on institutional investors first, then it's going to be a better experience for retail investors later.
So you say the institutional first?
Yeah. And you can ask me more about exchange afterwards.
Is KYC required for exchange?
We're still working on that.
You're going to do stock futures, lending,
We're not doing the same. We are as an exchange will be doing
lending.
like margin space again. It will exist on the platform, but it's not going to be provided for us so as to avoid the conflict of interest that
So you would look for external liquidity providers.
we have those.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.